When it comes to Databricks, it is a cloud-agnostic distributed computing framework which leverages Spark under the hood. When I say cloud-agnostic, it means once you learn Databricks, you should be able to support Databricks-related projects on any of the major cloud platforms, be it AWS or Azure or GCP. As part of this sectional module, we'll understand how to get started with Databricks on Azure. We'll start with signing up for the Azure account. Then we'll see how to log in and increase quotas so that we can actually set up multi-node cluster depending upon our requirements. Then we'll actually create Azure Databricks Workspace. Then we'll understand how to launch and get into the Azure Databricks UI. Then we'll go through the details about Azure Databricks UI briefly. Then we'll understand how to create Azure Databricks cluster using Databricks UI. We'll also understand how to upload data using Azure Databricks UI. Then we'll actually come up with a notebook to process the data that is there as part of Azure Blob by leveraging the Databricks distributed computing framework. We'll also understand how to download and share the notebooks that are developed as part of Azure Databricks platform by exporting and importing the notebooks. Then we will see how to clean up the resources to make sure that we don't waste money once we learn the details with respect to Databricks. Even though it is getting started, I would like to cover even the cleaning up process. That way you should be able to clean up whenever you are not using for extended period of time. By the end of this sectional module, you will understand how to get started with the Databricks on Azure. Once you get started with the Databricks on Azure, you should be able to go through relevant sections or modules to understand all the key concepts related to Databricks. As part of this sectional module, we are going through the details about getting started with Databricks on Azure. To get started with Databricks on Azure, first you need to have Azure account. Without Azure account, you will not be able to set up Databricks on Azure. The way you can get started is you can go to Google and search for Microsoft Azure. Then you should be able to click on this official link. It is nothing but azure.microsoft.com. Then you should be able to take it further. You can also go to portal.azure.com and you should be able to take it further. You can start with Azure for free. They'll give $200 credit, which is valid for 1 month. You have to saturate the $200 credit within 1 month. If you do not, it will automatically expire and you have to pay further. That being said, you can actually start with trying Azure for free. Make sure you follow the instructions to sign up and make sure you have account with respect to Azure. Once you have the account, you should be able to click on sign in here and log in. And then you should be able to start using Azure for your purpose. In this case, we'll be using it for Databricks. That being said, once the account is set up, you can also go to portal.azure.com. Let's say portal.azure.com. Once we are on this page, we should be able to use the account which is used for the sign up process. We should be able to use it for login. Once you enter the email ID, you can click on next. It will prompt you for the password. You have to choose appropriate account here. In my case, it is personal account. Let me click on personal account. Then it will actually prompt for the password. You have to enter the password and then you should be able to log in into the Azure portal. It will redirect us to portal.azure.com once the process of logging in is done. Let's wait until it is done. You can see that it is redirected to portal.azure.com. We should be able to manage the services once we get into the portal.azure.com. Now you can see that I am successfully logged in. It is time for us to explore how to increase quotas so that we should be able to leverage Azure to understand the Databricks in depth. In the process of getting started with Databricks on Azure, in previous lecture, we have gone through details about signing up for the Azure account. Once you have the Azure account, you should be able to log in by using URL called as portal.azure.com. The first thing what you need to keep in mind is to increase quotas. By default, you will be having very limited quota. You need to make sure that the quotas are increased. Let's go to the details about logging in into the portal.azure.com and also increase the quotas. First, let me actually open my browser in private mode. Then let me go to portal.azure.com. Now let me enter my email ID, then click on next. We can also sign in with GitHub. In this case, my account is personal and hence I have to click on this. Now it is prompting for the password. The password is entered. If you want, you can actually click on don't throw this again so that you are automatically logged in from the next time. Let's say yes. Now we are logged in into the portal.azure.com. Once you are inside portal.azure.com, you should be able to search for quotas as part of the global search bar. And then you should be able to place the request to increase the quotas. This is the global search bar. Here you should be able to search for quotas. You can go to the quotas. This is the dashboard with respect to quotas. You should be able to go to Microsoft Compute to review the VM level quotas. This is the most important thing which you need to keep in mind to set up Databricks on top of Azure. You need to have enough capacity to set up clusters of specific sizes. That being said, you should be able to see the details here. When it comes to total regional vCPUs, it is 50 for me. In your case, it could be 10. You can actually increase by clicking on edit button here. In this case, I'm talking about East US. For other regions, the limit might be different. This is the most important thing which you need to keep in mind. To increase, you just have to click on edit. Then you should be able to increase to whatever number you want, let's say 100. Then you should be able to click on save and continue. Now you can actually go to the message. It says, please wait a few minutes while we review your request to increase the total regional vCPU's quota to 100 in the East US region. If you close the quota details blade, you will not see a status update for your request, but can check it in the Azure activity log. After some time, you should be able to check the status. You can see that it have failed for me. I need to create a support request to make sure that my quota is increased. In your case, as you might start at 10, if you increase it to 20 or 25, it might be automatic. If it is not automatic, then you have to create a support request to ensure that your quota is increased. I would highly recommend you to increase quota at least to 15 or 20 so that you should be able to explore some of the advanced concepts with respect to Databricks. Otherwise, you will be limited with very few resources. Even 10 is a good starting point. You don't need to have more than 10 to begin with. Databricks supports something called a single node cluster. Using that single node cluster, you should be able to explore most of the concepts. But as you get into some advanced stuff, if you really want to understand the power of multi-node cluster, then you have to have higher number of total regional vCPUs so that you can actually set up cluster with multiple nodes with a lot more vCPUs depending upon the workload which you want to process. That being said, keep always quotas in mind. If at all, if you are not able to set up the clusters for whatever reasons, make sure you increase the quota and you take it further. As part of getting started with Databricks on Azure, in this lecture, let's go to the details about creating Azure Databricks Workspace. For this, you need to have valid Azure account, and also you need to make sure you pick the region where you have enough quota. In this case, I have up to 100 with respect to East US. You can see here, even though it was rejected earlier, now you can see that it is showing up 100 here, which means it is approved in the backend even though the message is shown as failed. Or it could be 50 only. Don't worry too much about this number. I have enough capacity as part of East US region. Now, once we pick the region, we should be able to go to the global search bar and search for Databricks. Databricks is one of the services that is available as part of Azure Marketplace. By clicking on the Azure Databricks service, you should be able to go to the Azure Databricks landing page. In your case, as you might not have any Databricks clusters yet, your page might be different. In my case, I already have one Databricks cluster. That's why it is actually showing the dashboard here. Even though your page might be different, you should be seeing a create button somewhere. Just pick the create button, click on it. It will take you to the wizard where you should be able to follow the steps to actually set up Azure Databricks Workspace. Let's wait until it goes to the wizard. Then I'll walk you through the details about how to set up Azure Databricks Workspace so that we have Databricks environment as part of Azure. Now you can see that it is asking us to define resource group, and then we have to set up rest of the information as well. When it comes to the resource group, I'll be creating a new one. Let me name it as ITV Azure DB demo. In this case, I'll be saying ITV Azure DB RS demo. This is my resource group name. Let me give it as RG demo. RG stands for resource group. Let me click on OK. Now this new resource group will be created. If you would like to use existing resource group, you should be able to leverage the existing resource group as well. Now, when it comes to the workspace name, I would like to give the name as ITV Azure DB demo. Let me give it as WS here, which stands for ITV Azure Databricks Workspace demo. When it comes to the region, I will be using East US because I have more quota compared to West US. I haven't reviewed the West US quota. I might have enough quota even in West US, but in this case, I'll be using East US. Make sure you choose the appropriate region where you have enough quota. When it comes to pricing tier, let me use the standard one. Now let me actually go to the networking. Make sure that you have no for these two. If you choose yes, then you will not be having public IP to access the Databricks Workspace. For that reason, don't choose yes. Also, don't choose yes here. Make sure both are no. Now you can click on next advanced. You can ignore, just go to the tags. If you'd like to give some tags here, you can give. In my case, I'm just ignoring them. Let me click on review plus create. We should be able to review the details. Everything looks good. Let's click on create. It will take care of creating the Databricks Workspace as part of the Azure environment. After a while, after clicking on the create button, it have actually took care of creating the Azure Databricks Workspace on top of Azure platform. Once you are on this page where it says your deployment is complete, you should be able to click on go to resource. and then you should be able to get into the page related to the new workspace that is created. You can see there is a button by saying launch workspace. You should be able to click on this. It will redirect you to the Databricks environment. Let's go to the details as part of the next lecture about how to access the Databricks platform, and also we'll get an overview about the Databricks platform. At this time, we are going through the details related to getting started with Databricks on Azure. So far, we have seen details related to signing up for the Azure account, increasing the quotas, and also creating Azure Databricks Workspace. Now, let me actually walk you through the process of logging in into the Azure account again, and then launching the workspace of a given Databricks environment. For that, I'll be starting with portal.azure.com. Let's say portal.azure.com. Most likely, it will auto login. It might take us into the Azure dashboard. Once you are in the Azure dashboard, you should be able to search for Azure Databricks service. Then you should be able to go to the Azure Databricks console or Azure Databricks dashboard. As we have recently used, you can see Azure Databricks as part of the recent services. You should be able to get into the Azure Databricks dashboard by clicking on this. Now you can see that I have two clusters. In this case, I would like to use this one for the demo purpose. Now we should be able to click on this. It will take us to the landing page of this Azure Databricks workspace or cluster. Now you should be able to scroll down and click on launch workspace. It will take us into the Databricks platform. You can see that it have generated a new URL using azure-databricks.net. Then you have some subdomain underneath it based upon our account, and it is actually logging in into the Databricks platform using Azure AD. Azure AD is nothing but Azure Active Directory. Now you can see that we are inside the Databricks platform, where we should be able to create Databricks clusters and submit our jobs to process the data. As we have understood the overall process of getting into the Databricks platform for a given Databricks workspace, now let's go to the details about quick walkthrough of this environment. As part of getting started with Databricks on Azure, in previous lecture we have gone through details about launching Azure Databricks Workspace or cluster. Once you launch, you will be ending up in this page. It will be similar to a Databricks platform on GCP or AWS as well. Irrespective of the cloud platform, the Databricks UI will remain almost same. There will be some subtle differences here and there. 99% it will be the same. That being said, you see there is a sidebar here on the left side. You should be able to expand it, and you should be able to see more details about each of these items that are there as part of the sidebar. You have create. By clicking on it, you should be able to create notebook, table, cluster, job, etc. We'll be going through the details whenever it is relevant. When it comes to all the notebooks, they'll be under workspace. If you go to the workspace, you have users. You should be able to add other users also into the platform. Each user can have his own notebooks under his workspace. Then you have repos. You should be able to use something called as repos, which is nothing but version control, and you should be able to maintain the notebooks or other code which is relevant for your environment. You can also go to recents and visit the recent items here. You have search bar. You should be able to search for anything as part of your workspace using search bar. You should be able to upload the data or create tables using this data. You can see here there is databases and then there is tables. However, you need to have a cluster up and running to use this. You will understand more about it at a later point in time. Then to review the cluster details, you should be able to go to compute and you should be able to review the cluster details here. There can be a number of clusters using one Databricks environment within one Databricks workspace within Azure. All the cluster details related to our Azure Databricks workspace, which is nothing but ITV Azure DB workspace demo. You should be able to review all the clusters here. Then we have jobs. You should be able to review all the jobs that are running or submitted in the past using this jobs page. Finally, you have settings. By going to settings, you should be able to review the current user settings. You should be able to click on this. You can actually generate tokens and you should be able to integrate the external clients leveraging these tokens. You can also integrate with Git. You can also configure notebook settings and other details. And then you have admin console. Using admin console, you should be able to define the groups, add users to the groups, so and so forth. Also, you can actually control the workspace settings. Workspace is nothing but this UI. You can control what all can be done using workspace by going to the workspace settings. These are the items which you have as part of the Databricks UI. You need to be familiar with most of these things so that you are comfortable in using the environment to make sure that you develop applications and also run and also monitor whether the applications are running as per the expectations or not. As part of getting started with Databricks on Azure, in previous lecture we have gone through details about walkthrough of Azure Databricks UI after launching Azure Databricks Workspace using Azure platform. Now it is time for us to create Azure Databricks cluster so that we understand more about how clusters can be created and other features related to Databricks. In this case, we'll be creating a single node cluster. Then we'll actually see rest of the details as part of the rest of the course. That being said, to create the cluster, either you can go to the create and then click on cluster, or you should be able to go to compute here and then you should be able to click on create cluster. Either way should work. In this case, I'll be using create and then cluster. It will take you to the wizard related to creating the cluster. We can actually give the name as getting started with Azure Databricks as the cluster name. You can use plain English with respect to cluster name. When it comes to cluster mode, you see you have high concurrency, standard, single node. For now, let's choose single node. It is primarily used for development purposes. It is more than enough to begin with. Then you have the Databricks runtime environment. I would highly recommend you to choose LTS. LTS stands for long-term support or something. It is generally available version. You should be using this rather than using the latest one, which might not be LTS. That being said, make sure you use 9.1 LTS as of today. In future, depending upon the latest version LTS, you should be able to choose that LTS and then you can take it further. Now, as part of this terminate after, I'll be using 15 minutes. So that the cluster will be automatically terminated if I'm idle for 15 minutes. 120 minutes is too much for us at the time of learning process, and hence 15 minutes should be good enough. Now when it comes to the node type, if you choose 14 GB memory and 4 cores, you will end up paying more to Azure. To minimize the cost, let's go with the minimal configuration. In this case, unless and until it is required for you, you should be able to choose with 8 GB RAM and 4 cores, which is nothing but standard F4 under compute optimized. You should be able to choose this and then you should be able to scroll down. After I scroll down, I realized that there are no other typical options with respect to Databricks on Azure. You should be able to click on create cluster to create the cluster. However, if you would like to customize the environment by setting up any environment variables, you should be able to expand advanced options. You should be able to set the environment variables here. Also, you can actually customize the Spark configuration here and then you can take it further. So in this case, I'm not going to customize any of the environment details and hence I'll not be setting up any environment variables or Spark config. I should be able to collapse this by clicking on this. Then I should be able to click on create cluster. It will take care of creating the cluster for us. It will take few minutes for us to get the cluster up and running. Once the cluster is up and running, you should be able to leverage this single node cluster to explore most of the concepts and features with respect to Databricks. Keep in mind that single node is not available as part of preview clusters which you get as part of Databricks. However, if you are using full trial, you should be able to leverage the single node even under full trial. As part of the previous lecture, we have gone through details about creating Azure Databricks cluster using a single node. That being said, while the cluster is coming up, we should be able to attempt to upload the data. To upload the data, you should be able to go to the home page of Databricks. Then you can actually scroll down. You can see there is something called as import and explore data. You should be able to click on this. Then you should be able to upload the files to confirm that we have some datasets to explore. In this case, I have the datasets under my home directory, which is nothing but ITversity, then research, then data, then retail DB. However, you can see that we will be able to only upload the file. Once you select the file, you should be able to see the upload button and you can take it further. As we do not see the option to upload the folder using this button, let's see if we'll be able to drag and drop. For that, I'm actually opening the Finder or File Explorer. If you are using Windows, you should be able to use File Explorer. On Mac, we should be able to use a new Finder window. Now the new Finder window is opened. Let me go to the ITversity, then research. As part of the research, I have data, then I have retail DB. Let me try dragging and dropping this retail_db folder. I moved that onto the other window. Now let me drag and drop here. You can see that it is able to upload everything that is there as part of the retail_db. Let's confirm by going into the create and then table. You should be able to access the folders and files by going to dbfs here. You can see that there is a folder by name file store. It contains tables. The retail DB is uploaded into this folder by default. You can see the files here. However, it haven't uploaded the subdirectories. If you look at the folder structure for retail_db, let me actually get the Finder window onto this. You can see that retail_db have the files. These are the files. On top of these files, it also contains folders. In this case, the folders are not uploaded, only the files are uploaded. which means there is no easy way to actually upload the complete folder recursively using web UI. You have to fall back onto the command line interface to upload all these files in one shot. I'll be covering a lot more details about command line interface at a later point in time. For now, you should be able to upload these folders one at a time. For that, you should be able to go to upload file here. Then you should be able to drag and drop by choosing the appropriate folder here. Let's say retail_db. That is the main folder. In that, I would like to upload. Let me click on the drop files to upload, and then let me choose customers. It is not showing the upload option here. Let me actually go to the Finder window. Let me actually drag and drop these 6 folders to see if they will be uploaded successfully or not. Now I have uploaded those 6 folders. I don't know whether they are uploaded into the retail_db directly or whether they are uploaded into respective directories. For that, we need to go to the dbfs here, then file store, then tables, then retail_db. You can see the folders here. Let's click on categories. You can see the file here. Even customers have the file. Even departments have the file. Order items also have the file. Orders also have file. Products also have file. So using drag and drop, you can mitigate the issue up to an extent. I am able to drag and drop all the folders in one shot into the retail_db folder. Keep in mind that once I go into the upload file, I entered the retail_db here. I know the path, as I have explored the path after uploading retail_db earlier by going into the dbfs, and then I have dragged and dropped the folders. The folders and the files in those folders are uploaded into the path which is specified here. You need to understand the relevance of this to make sure that the files and folders go into the appropriate location. This is how you should be able to quickly upload the files and folders into Databricks environment using the Databricks web UI. Now it is time for us to understand how to process this data. We'll be creating a notebook and we will see how to process this data as part of subsequent lectures in this section or module. So far we have created the cluster and also we have uploaded the data. Now it is time for us to create a notebook so that we understand how to process the data. In this case, I'll be creating the notebook using Python as programming language. If you would like to use Scala or if you would like to create notebook using SQL, you should be able to choose those options as well. Let's go to the process so that you understand what I'm talking about here. To create the notebook, you should be able to go to create and then click on notebook here. Then you should be able to specify the name for the notebook. Let's say getting started with Azure Databricks. That is my notebook name as well. Now we should be able to click on create. It will take care of creating the notebook for us. You can see that the notebook have automatically selected the existing cluster. If you have multiple clusters, if you would like to run your notebook using a specific cluster, you should be able to click on this menu and you should be able to choose the appropriate cluster here. Now the notebook is created. You can see that it have used Python kernel. If you would like to change the kernel, you should be able to click on this. Then you should be able to change the default language or default kernel. Kernel is the term which we use as part of the Jupyter environment. In Databricks notebooks, we don't use the term called as kernel. We just say language. That being said, as part of the create notebook itself, we should be able to choose the appropriate language by clicking on this drop down. The supported languages are nothing but Scala, SQL and R on top of Python. Also, once you create the notebook, you should always be able to change it by clicking on this and then by going into the default language. Even though there is one default language, you should be able to use something called as magic and you should be able to write the code using other languages as well. That being said, I'll be demonstrating using Python for now. When it comes to the files, they are under the location called as file store, tables, retail_db, blah, blah, blah. You can review by getting into the create and then table and then dbfs. File store is the base folder, then tables, then retail_db. You can see the folders for each and every dataset here. These are the folders and files which are uploaded as part of the previous lecture. To make sure that we can access these folders and files, we should be able to use something called as %fs magic as part of notebook. Now let's go to the notebook which is created earlier. For that, you should be able to go to the workspace. As part of the workspace, you can actually go to the users. Make sure you choose the appropriate user. At this time, I have only one user, which is nothing but this one. In that, you can actually see the notebooks. If you have folders, you can actually go to the folders as well and you should be able to eventually access the notebook. In my case, I do not have any folders under my workspace. I directly have the notebook. The notebook is nothing but getting started with Azure Databricks. This is the notebook which we have created earlier by going to create and then by clicking on notebook. Now we should be able to click on this. You can see that it have opened that notebook which we have created earlier. Now we should be able to leverage something called as %fs. It has several subcommands. One of them is nothing but ls. Should be able to validate the files and folders using ls command under %fs. ls stands for listing. It is similar to our Linux ls command. That being said, you can just say %fs and then ls and run it. You can see the files and folders that are available out of the box, and then we should be able to take it further. You can see that there are 3 paths. One is file store, second one is Databricks datasets, third one is Databricks results. These two are related to Databricks. They are mounted onto almost all the Databricks environments. File store is private to our environment. Now we should be able to say %fs ls, then dbfs /file store. It is optional to specify dbfs. You don't need to specify dbfs. If you do not want to specify dbfs, you can just remove this part, and then you should be able to run /file store like this. You should be able to see the subfolder under file store. Now, when it comes to our dataset, which is uploaded earlier, the path is nothing but /file store /tables /retail_db. Now we should be able to run it. You can actually see the files and folders in this location. To get the files and folders in specific folder, you should be able to specify the path of that folder, and you should be able to see the files and folders in that specific folder. This is how you should be able to interact with the file system without writing any code. However, when it comes to processing the data using Databricks platform, we should be using Spark APIs. The programming language can be either Python or Scala or SQL or R. Irrespective of the programming language, you should be using Spark APIs so that the data can be processed leveraging Databricks platform. That being said, in the next lecture, let's go to the details about how to process the data. We'll also see how to validate as part of the subsequent lecture. At this time, we're in the process of getting started with Databricks on Azure. So far, we have set up Azure Databricks Workspace, and then we have launched a cluster, and also we have validated whether the files are successfully uploaded or not after uploading the files. We have used %fs to actually validate the existence of files. Now let's go to the details about developing a simple application to understand how to process the data using notebooks as part of Databricks environment. Before getting into the details, let's make sure that the cluster is started. Because I took a pause in between, the cluster is terminated as we have set up the cluster with only 15 minutes idle time. Beyond 15 minutes, it will actually terminate the cluster so that we are not unnecessarily charged. That being said, let me click on Start Cluster, then confirm. Let's wait until cluster is started. Then we'll actually go to the details about developing a simple application to process the data where data is there as part of Azure Blob Storage, which is exposed through DBFS. DBFS stands for Databricks File System. Let's wait until cluster comes up, then we'll take it further. As our notebook is created using Python as the default language, we'll be actually taking care of developing the application using Python as the language. While cluster is coming up, we should be able to come up with the code. However, we'll not be able to validate. In this case, I can say df equal to, when it comes to orders dataset, the dataset is comma separated. As the dataset is comma separated, we should be able to use something called as spark.read. Read is nothing but of type data frame reader. We should be able to use a function which is available as part of data frame reader object, which is nothing but CSV. Then we should be able to specify the path. In this case, let's use orders dataset. If you look at this, this is the location for the orders dataset. When it comes to the protocol, DBFS is optional. We don't need to specify the protocol here. We can just specify the path like this. Let me paste here. Now let me run this. It will take care of creating something called a Spark data frame by reading the files from this location. As the cluster is not up yet, it is not working as per our expectations. Let's wait until it comes up. Meanwhile, I will improvise on the code. When it comes to the files in this location, the data in those files do not have header. As the data do not have header, I would like to explicitly specify the attribute names for the data that is there as part of the files. For that, I should be able to add additional attribute called as schema for this CSV function. First argument is nothing but path. Then we should be able to leverage keyword arguments. One of the keyword arguments that is available is nothing but schema. And now you should be able to say equal to. Then you should be able to specify the schema in the form of a string where we'll be specifying the attribute names along with the data types. The first attribute in orders dataset is nothing but order ID. It is of type int, and hence I said order ID int. It contains 4 attributes. The second attribute is nothing but order date. It is of type string. We can also represent it as date. For now I am using string. Then the third argument is nothing but order customer ID. It is of type integer, and hence I can say int. Then fourth argument is nothing but order status, which is of type string, and hence I am saying string here. Also, when it comes to the data, I would like to automatically infer the data types. Because we have explicitly specified the data types for each and every attribute, it will be automatically inferred. Now the cluster is up and running. We should be able to run this. For some reason it is not running. Let me run it by clicking on this and then by clicking on run cell. Even now it is not running. Let me refresh this page. I hope whatever code we have developed is preserved. It is preserved. Now we should be able to run this. You can see that it is running fine this time. Now you should be able to preview the schema as well. If you would like to preview the data, you should be able to use something called a show function on top of data frame. You should be able to preview the data. You can see that it have displayed first 20 records here. It is the default behavior. If you would like to display more, you should be able to pass the number of records you wanted to see as argument. That being said, you should be able to get the count by saying df.count. You can see that it have returned 68,883 records, which means the folder which is used here contain files which contain 68,883 orders records. Now let's define a problem statement and come up with a solution using Spark APS. The problem statement is nothing but getting the number of orders placed by date. To achieve that, we should be able to group the data by order date, and we should be able to use a function called as count to get the number of orders per day. Let's develop the code here. Let me say df.groupby. Groupby is the function that is available on top of data frame. Now we should be able to pass the column on which we wanted to group the data. In this case, it is nothing but order underscore date. When it comes to the actual data, even though order dates have timestamps, the timestamp is mostly 000000, which means we should be able to directly group the data by order underscore date. If we have timestamp as well, then we should be able to extract only this part and then group by using that part. As we do not have timestamp beyond zeros here, we should be able to directly specify group by order date like this. Now to aggregate data by date, we should be able to use something called as ag function. As part of ag, we should be able to use count. Then we should be able to say star like this so that we can get the number of records per date. We can also provide the alias by saying dot alias. Let's say order underscore count. To preview the data, we should be able to say dot, then backward slash, then show. Now, before running this, we need to make sure that the count is imported. For that, we can add one more cell here. Let's add one more cell. We should be able to click on plus here to add one more cell. Now we can say from pyspark.sql.functions import count. Now let's run this. Now the count function is imported. Now we should be able to run this. Let's see if it works or not. It seems to be working. You can see the count by date here. In this case, the count by date is printed on the screen. Many times we would like to write this data to some target location. For that, what I'll be doing is on top of this data frame, I'll be using attribute called as write. Data frame contains an attribute called as write. It is of type data frame writer. It exposes APIs to actually write the data frame to whatever location we want to write to. That being said, let me say write. Now we should be able to specify the appropriate API. In this case, I would like to write the data in the form of CSV, and hence I can say CSV. I need to specify the location to which I would like to write the data. We have to specify the location of the folder. The folder should not exist by default. If it exists, it will fail. As long as we specify the folder where we have write permissions to on the parent folder of the folder which we are going to specify here, we should be good to go. Now, in this case, what I'll be doing is, as part of the CSV, let me copy the original folder, which is nothing but this one. I'll not be copying orders. I'll be copying only up to retail DB. Now I should be able to paste here. Then I can say order count by date. This is the location where I would like to preserve the output. Now let's run this. It will take care of writing the data into the target location. You can see that it have worked as per our expectations. As we have developed a simple data processing application using Spark APIs on top of Databricks platform. Now let's go ahead and validate whether the data is written into that location or not. As part of the previous lecture, we have gone through details about developing a simple application using Spark APIs on top of Databricks cluster. We have used this notebook. Now we need to ensure that the data is returned to the target location as per our expectations. The target location where we have specified to preserve the data, where data is grouped by date and then we got the count, is nothing but this location. It is file store tables retail underscore DB order count by date. We should be able to copy this path. Then we should be able to say %fs, then ls, paste. Then you should be able to run it. If the files are successfully written, you should be able to see the files here. You can see the file here. And the actual file is nothing but this one. There are few additional files which are primarily to take care of the writing part to be successful. That being said, to ensure that the CSV file have the data as per our expectations, what we can do, we can again use the Spark APIs. That is one way to validate the existence of data in this file. Especially, we would like to review whether the data is as per our expectations or not. As we have used write.csv to write the files into this location using CSV file format, we should be able to say spark.read.csv we should be able to specify the path here. Now we should be able to assign it to a data frame. Let's name it as order count by date. This is the data frame name. Let's run this. Now you can see that a data frame by name order count by date is created using the dataset that is there as part of this file. When it comes to using APIs such as spark.read.csv, we don't need to specify the path for the file. As long as we specify the path for the folder, we are good to go. In this case, I can remove this, run this. It will take care of creating the data frame. As these files are generated by Spark itself, this is smart enough to ignore these files and only read those files which contain the actual data. The files which are created to maintain the overhead while writing the data into the target will be automatically ignored. That being said, now let's pick this. Let's preview the data by saying order count by date, then dot show. You should be able to see the data here. As the dataset doesn't have header, it is actually picking the column names which are system generated. Now we should be able to get the count as well. To get the count, I should be able to say order count by date, then count. We should be able to see the count here. The data frame contains 364 records. You can also say display. Display is a special function that is available as part of the Databricks notebooks. Then you should be able to pass the data frame to it. You should be able to see the data in tabular format. Also, you should be able to use this and generate the reports. This is how you should be able to read the data from the files into data frame and take care of validations, or if you would like to even generate the reports, you should be able to generate the reports. That being said, we have successfully developed an application which actually grouped the data by date and returned to a file, and then we have successfully validated whether the file contain the data as per the expectations or not. As part of getting started with Databricks on Azure, so far we have seen details about setting up the cluster and also using the cluster to process the data. Now we'll get into the details about terminating the cluster and also deleting the workspace from Azure. Before going through those details, let's understand how to take the backup of the notebooks that are developed so far. When it comes to the real projects, we typically have the backup of our code in the form of Git repositories. We don't need to take the backup of the notebooks when we actually start working on projects. But as part of the learning process, we might want to terminate everything with respect to Workspace, and then we might want to move on to the new workspace, set up the clusters over there and practice over there. In that process, it is better to take the backup of our notebooks so that the notebooks can be reused in future. The way you can take the backup of the notebook is by going to the workspace here. You can go to the workspace. You can click on this to go to the workspace. Then you should be able to expand this. Then you should be able to say export to take the backup of the notebook. If you have a folder with multiple notebooks in it, you should be able to export the complete folder also. Even you should be able to export the complete workspace by expanding this. You can see there is export option. You should be able to export everything that is associated with this user by saying either DBC archive or source file or HTML. You have three options here. In this case, I'll be exporting only the notebook. For that, I should be able to go to the workspace, choose the notebook, then export. Then I should be able to export as DBC archive or IPython notebook. For now, let me export it as DBC archive. Now you can see that the file is being exported. It is successfully downloaded into the downloads folder on my Mac. Once it is exported, you should be able to delete if you want. Let me say move to trash. It will be deleted. Now, once I share the DBC file with you, you should be able to upload into your account as a DBC file, and you should be able to use the code that is there as part of the notebook for your reference to get started with Databricks on Azure or even on AWS. That being said, let me expand this. Let me say import. You can also click on folder if you have a folder, and then you should be able to import into a folder as well. Now, either you can actually drag and drop, or you should be able to browse for the file, and you can actually import using that file as part of the browse. In this case, I'll be using the browse approach. I have clicked on that, and now I should be able to go to downloads. As part of the downloads, I should be able to see the DBC file. This is the one which I'm referring to. Now I should be able to say upload, then import. Now you should be able to see the notebook. Let me click on notebook. Now we are in the notebook. Once you get the notebook like this in your environment, make sure you attach to running cluster. Once you attach to running cluster, you should be able to run these commands. Everything should work without any issues as long as the locations in your environment are same as the locations in my environment. This is how you should be able to leverage the DBC files which I am going to share with you by importing into your environment and then by making some changes to the code, and you should be able to run against your environment. As we understood how to take the backup of the notebooks by exporting and also how to share with others, now it is time for us to terminating the cluster in the process of understanding how to clean up everything, if at all we have to clean up. As part of getting started with the Databricks on Azure, at this time we are going through the details about cleaning up everything. We have understood how to take the backup of notebooks if at all it is required before cleaning up everything. As we understood the process of taking the backup, now let's go to the details about terminating the cluster. Then we'll see the details about deleting the workspace in Azure portal. That being said, to terminate the cluster, you should be able to go to compute here. Then you should be able to review the cluster. To terminate the cluster, you should be able to click on this square button. It will take care of terminating the cluster. However, the configuration will be preserved. If you would like to terminate and also delete, then you have to click on X, which will actually take care of deleting the configuration as well. Let's click on this so that it not only terminates the cluster but also deletes the configuration. Now we should be able to click on delete. It will take care of terminating the cluster and then deleting the configuration. Now you can see that the cluster is terminated and also the configuration is deleted. You will not be able to retain the configuration and start the cluster again, as the configuration is also deleted. Most of the times we just terminate the cluster so that the configuration is preserved for some time. That way we should be able to clone using the existing configuration and create the clusters. However, at this time we are actually going through the process of cleaning up everything with respect to Databricks on Azure. That's why I have not only terminated the cluster but also removed the configuration by clicking on X, which took care of terminating and removing the configuration of the cluster. As the cluster is terminated and also configuration is removed, now it is time for us to cleaning up the workspace using Azure portal. As part of getting started with Databricks on Azure, at this time we are talking about cleaning up the workspace that is associated with our Azure Databricks environment. If you recollect, when I have created this workspace, which is nothing but ITV Azure DB WS demo, I have created a new resource group. At this time, only this is there as part of that resource group. If we delete that resource group, it will take care of deleting this workspace as well. Now we should be able to go to the resource groups. We can actually review the details. Then we should be able to take it further. To access the resource group, you should be able to go to the resource groups dashboard by searching for it as part of the global search bar. As I have accessed resource groups recently, it is there as part of the recent services also. And hence I should be able to go to the resource groups from the recent services. If you do not see resource groups as a part of the recent services, just search for it here. You should be able to see the logo like this. You can actually click on it and you should be able to go to resource groups dashboard. Also, you can see recent resources here. You can see the ITV Azure DB RG demo here. You can actually click on this to get into the resource group that is associated with our Databricks workspace. However, I'll be clicking on it. Now we should be able to see the resource groups here. I'm interested in this. You can expand this. You will not be seeing delete option here. However, if you click on this resource group, it will actually take you to the landing page of the resource group. You can see there is a delete resource group option here. You should be able to click on this. Then you have to type the resource group name. It is nothing but ITV Azure DB WS demo. Let me copy and then paste here. However, it is not letting us to delete. Please enter ITV Azure DB WS demo. This is actually the workspace name, not the resource group name. I have to type the resource group name. Let me copy and paste the resource group name rather than workspace name. Now you can see that delete option is enabled. We can actually click on it. It will take care of deleting the complete resource group, which includes the workspace as well. Let's wait until everything is deleted. We'll review whether the resource group or any components of the resource group still exist. If they exist, then we need to understand how to delete those. But most likely everything will be cleaned up automatically for us. After placing the request to delete the resource group, I have waited for almost 5 minutes and it haven't moved forward. Then I have refreshed the screen and went into the resource groups dashboard only to realize that the resource group is already deleted. As long as you have only Databricks Workspace as part of the resource group, you can leverage the approach of deleting the resource group to delete everything that is associated with the Databricks Workspace. However, if the resource group have other important stuff and if you do not want to delete the other important stuff, then you just have to delete the Databricks Workspace. You should not delete the resource group directly. This is how you should be able to get started with Databricks on Azure. Make sure you understand the process of setting up the environment, using the environment, and also cleaning up the environment if at all it is required to clean the environment. That being said, as part of the subsequent sections or modules in this course, you will be understanding all the key concepts related to Databricks. Make sure you are comfortable with Azure and then get into the details about learning all the important features related to Databricks on Azure. Once you set up the environment, whether it is Azure or GCP or AWS, with respect to Databricks, the concepts will remain same. You don't need to worry too much about to transition from one cloud environment to another cloud environment. The reason is Databricks is cloud agnostic distributed computing platform. Once you are used to it, you should be able to support the Databricks related projects on all major cloud platforms.